Hi everyone, this is Ellen from Astrology Journal. I want to talk about the chart for the Capricorn full moon. That happened on July 10th at 4:37 Eastern Daylight Time. I'm recording this on July 11th. I apologize for being a day late. I've been doing a lot of readings this month and I need a little bit of downtime. Also, I have another Substack. I haven't been posting there, but there have been a lot of ideas coming through, and I've wanted to make sure that I get those down so that I can come back to them later. So with regard to this chart, the general theme that I see is this idea of the essence of us, which we can think of as something hidden within us that we come in with, that in our journey through life, we progressively, or we're meant to perhaps progressively get to know. And the question in this chart is why, to the extent that's not happening in human beings at this time, in the human collective at this time, with regard to each individual, excuse me, why is that not happening? So that's what the question I'm going to look at and what we're going to consider in this chart. So first of all, we have a Capricorn moon that's shown here with Capricorn at with the moon at 18 degrees of Capricorn, and then opposite that is the sun at 18 degrees of Cancer, and that's what shows us this is a full moon. So there's always an opposition between the sun and the moon in a full moon. So and then if we look, there are two primary aspect patterns in this chart. One is a mystic rectangle, and you can see that as this rectangle shape in the chart. It's made up of two sextiles, which are these purple dotted lines on the edges, on the short edges, and then these two yellow dotted lines on the outer longer edges, and then this X shape in the middle made by two, I guess you could call them orange lines, orange solid lines in the middle. And these two solid lines in the middle are oppositions forming the cross. So that's one pattern, and that's where the idea of the hidden essence within us comes in. Astrology King has an article on their site about the mystic rectangle. I haven't read it in a long time, but it talks about this idea of the mystic rectangle and an envelope and something hidden, an essence within that that's hidden. And that, at least that's what I remember about it. And so that's what I'm picking up on and focusing on, this idea of this hidden essence, this hidden gift, this hidden talent, this hidden something about us that's inside this envelope. And then the other aspect pattern involves this opposition between the full moon, between the sun and the moon, and then this green line, which is going off here to the side to Ceres and Aries. So Aries is this idea of who am I? And this green line is indicating a T-square with this opposition. And so a T-square is made up of an opposition and two squares. The squares are between, in this case, Ceres and the moon, and then Ceres and the sun. And the T-square is this idea of challenge and crisis. So if the question is what's hidden in that mystic rectangle, what's that essence that's hidden from us in that mystic rectangle, then perhaps the T-square can give us insight into that, into why it might be hidden, and perhaps also the solution to how we might be able to access it. And so the way that, for the purposes of this reading, the way that I might read the story of Ceres, that's that story of Ceres and her daughter Persephone. I think actually Ceres is the Greek version and her daughter is Proserpina, but I get this mixed up all the time. There's also Demeter and Persephone. I usually just say Ceres and Persephone. I think Demeter and Persephone are the Roman version. I always get it mixed up. I apologize for that. But the story is that Ceres has a daughter, and I'm going to call her Persephone, and Persephone is abducted by Pluto, Hades. In the chart, Pluto is Pluto here, and it's at Aquarius, so that speaks of this idea of a trauma. So Pluto is abducted by Hades and is given permission by Zeus, the head god, to do so. And then that sends Ceres on a grief journey where she withdraws her energy from the earth, and that brings about winter. Winter in the northern hemisphere is aligned with Capricorn, the beginning of Capricorn on the natural wheel, on the seasonal wheel, we could say, is this winter solstice when Capricorn, when winter begins, and that starts at 0 degrees of Capricorn on the calendar zodiac wheel. So Capricorn has to do with this idea of scarcity and withdrawing of energy. But, and so you obviously think about the mother who is grieving the loss of her daughter, but there's an interesting perspective that I think is worth considering in regard to this chart, and that is the idea of power, and part of the grief being about the betrayal of her power. Because Zeus says, yeah, go ahead, take Persephone without consulting Ceres. And so that's something to think about. I am stepping in here. Before going further, I just want to clearly state that what I say next is not in any way, shape, or form meant to blame parents. What I'm talking about are archetypal, astrological, metaphorical stories, and that are giving insight into our structure as a whole. Nothing that I say here is meant to blame parents or any individual. What I hope that by talking about this, what I hope that it does, it helps to show up the structure that we're all in, and that creates circumstances and situations that are harmful for all of us, and particularly harmful for those to whom these things happen. So with that said, please keep that in mind when you listen to the next part, or skip over it if that's what you prefer. I'll put a sort of a banner that says sensitive content, and you can skip over that to the next part if that's your preference. And then the other thing is the idea of the pawn. The child is pawn within these power dynamics. And so because there are these power struggles going on, the child isn't really being tended to understand who she is. The sense I get when I've read the story of Persephone, or I haven't actually read the Greek version or the Roman version, or I've read people's interpretations of it. The sense I always get is that it's about this sense of this young woman, still a child, but not really in full possession of herself, not really grounded or anchored. She's just sort of out in the field enjoying the day, which is a good thing. But I don't get the sense of a solid, anchored understanding of who she is. So, which perhaps, I'll leave it there. Well, I'll say it. Perhaps that's part of what makes her vulnerable to this, because the society is not interested in what's happening with the child. The society is more interested in their power dynamics. So to the extent that reading has validity, and you can decide that for yourself, the question becomes, perhaps that has something to do with why the essence we aren't able to access that essence within the envelope. If we think about the child, the newborn baby, as the envelope, as in the essence, and it's imbued with this essence, and we think about its life path as about the process of journeying within itself to get to know itself, to know who it is, Aries, who am I? Then we have Capricorn and Cancer. Capricorn is the structures and Cancer is the nurturance. So ideally what we're born into is a structure that allows for the nurturance of us as we learn who we are, and it gives us a reflection back for who we are. And in that process we actually get to slowly, progressively sort of unlock, it's a mixed metaphor, but unlock this envelope and start to enter into it and get to know it, and then start to develop it. And then we get to bring that into our relationships, the developed gift of our essence, the developed essence that's been shaped into a gift, into relationship with others. And in that way, as we're all doing that, then that's what elevates humanity. That's to me the process that will allow us to elevate above this kind of ongoing power struggle that keeps us mired and prevents us from evolving and developing beyond where we are as a human collective, as a human organism. So that is how I would read those together. We can go a little bit further. We can look at, here is the full moon within the context of the full lunation cycle. And we see in July started with the first quarter moon. Of course, the lunation cycle always starts with a new moon. That happened at the end of June. And that's this idea of the car and the train, so the individual and the collective, in the sense of they're either competing or they're on a collision course, depending on who you read. And so that suggests that the dynamic between the collective and the individual is out of whack. And how can we bring it back into alignment so that it's serving all of humanity, not the people vying for power, the few people vying for power. Their vying is sort of depleting all of us from the resources that we all need to grow, including them, to grow, the meaningful resources of the structure that nurtures our potential. Their power struggles are depleting that from all of us, and I think including themselves. So the full moon. So the interesting thing is this that July started with the first quarter moon, and that's the symbolism of the miners coming out of the mine. And the sense you get is the sense. My read on this, which I shared in my my overview for July that I sent out to paid subscribers, the sense that I get of that is going down into the mine and discovering the gem of who you are, the essence of who you are, and coming up, and now you have that essence, and now you're entering into the world. And that scene with here, the gibbous phase, the white caps, and you're entering into a turbulent world. And the work I feel for the month is, how do we keep bringing ourselves back to ourselves? Because the turbulence can lead us to, if that new understanding of ourselves is indeed new, then we're prone to be sort of brought back into the old dynamics. And so the work of this month is to keep bringing ourselves back into alignment, recognizing how that pattern happens, and bringing ourselves back into alignment as we go through the turbulence of the society that we come out of the mine, and we enter into the society where this white cap type stuff is happening. And then the full moon is a child carrying oversized grocery bag. I can't remember the exact phrasing, but the idea there is this overburdened child. This child who is being given, I would say, too much responsibility, too much to do. It's not in keeping with what its actual needs are, where it is. So Capricorn structure, are we structuring in the expectation that the child, Capricorn is also the adult and also kind of maturity. Are we expecting the child to be mature beyond its age, without giving it the resources and the nurturance it needs to be able to step into that role as a natural part of its process? Or are we asking it to take on too much too soon? And by the way, I'm not saying that the child can't take on a whole lot. The question isn't what is the child capable of. That's Capricorn capable. The question is, are we creating the structure and the nurturance that allows the child to naturally step into this? Carrying an oversized grocery bag suggests that the child is being overburdened before it's actually developed, been able to do that. Might it be able to do that if it has the proper nurturance? And that wouldn't be overextension? Yes, it might be possible. But the question is, are we expecting before we're providing nurturance? Are we allowing the child to actually develop into these possibilities rather than saying this is what you should be able to do now and having them do that? So the Three of Pentacles, so each, let's just go up here. So each sign is broken up into 3 10-degree segments. And those are called decans or deacons or decans, depending on who you listen to. The moon is in the second decan of Capricorn, and the sun is in the second decan of Cancer. And so the moon is in the decan that's ruled by Mars. Mars is the natural ruler of Aries, so that has something to do with this question of who am I? And then the sun is in the decan that's ruled by Mercury. Mercury has to do with our early environment and our early education. So in a very real sense, this has to do with how we raise our children. And if you think about Mercury as ruler of Gemini, so Mercury as having to do with our early environment and our early education, that is in its rulership of Gemini. And when you look on the natural wheel, Gemini and Capricorn are naturally inconjunct. And the inconjunct has to do with this idea of making adjustments. It's if you think about, here's the opposition, here is an opposition, here's an opposition. And the inconjunct, if we just start here at the moon, it sort of angles off over here. And so you can think of it as like the cables on a suspension bridge. I've talked about this a lot. And the purpose of the cables on the suspension bridge is to make constant adjustments as, you know, it's buffeted by all these forces, the cars going over it, the winds, whatever. It's buffeted by these forces, and it translates those forces into the ground. And so it ensures that the road remains passable. So if we think about the opposition as the road, then the purpose of the inconjunct is to continually make adjustments to keep us in alignment so that we can continue traveling our paths. So there is a natural inconjunct between Gemini, the child, our early education, our early environment, and Capricorn, the structures, the norms, the rules, the governments. And so ideally, the structures and the norms are adjusting to what the child actually needs. If the cables on the bridges are not flexible, cannot move, if they are rigid, then they're not going to be able to translate those forces, and they're going to break. And so in this case, if the rules are rigid and it says it doesn't matter who you are, we're not going to pay attention to what your actual needs are, child, we're just going to expect you to do this, that, and this and that. And we expect you to step into that regardless of whether or not you're ready or not. And it wouldn't even be thinking about, is the child ready? It would just say, do this. Then to that extent, the cable breaks. And in a sense, the child breaks. And so we always want to be, as a society, we always want to be thinking not what we need from the child, not what we think the child should be capable of, not our ideas about what should be possible, but actually what does a child truly actually need. And the moon has to do with this idea of nurturance and nourishment and mothering. And so it's about, part of this chart is talking about bringing, the mother, the nurturance principle. If we think about the mother archetypally, is about the nurturance principle, bringing that back into our structures so that the child can actually grow and come to understand who it is and what its essence is and what its gifts and talents are, what it has to, what it has to bring to the larger human collective. So there's also, if we look at the Three of Pentacles, that is this image. This is an interesting image. This is a craftsperson working in like a church or something like that. And here, I guess these are the archetypes. Not the archetypes, the architects. And the idea with this card is, and I'm new to Tarot, so just put that out there so you can look into this for yourself. But my understanding about this is this idea of people occupying different roles, and it's not about a worth hierarchy. It's not about these architects are superior to this craftsperson. It's about they're all working together and they're fulfilling different roles and they're having a conversation. 3 would have to do with Gemini, and communication also Gemini. So when we're all in our roles and we're understanding the worth of our roles and not creating these false worth hierarchies because we don't understand the worth of our roles. And so for some reason our psyche needs to believe that we are superior to another. If we're not doing that, if we all are being supported in understanding who we are, accessing our gifts and talents, given this, the opportunities and the resources and the support within the context of, nourishment and nurturance to develop those, then we fall into these natural roles, but they're not worth hierarchies. They're just different people doing different things. And then the communication can naturally flow as each is working to fulfill their role. And the communication can be two-way. The architects can learn from the craftsperson just as the craftsperson can learn from the architect, rather than them having to be at odds with one another. So the way that I like to, so just as a backdrop for how I'm thinking about this, so each sign has 3 decans, 3 10-degree segments. Those are the decans or the decans or the decans, depending on who you listen to. And the way that I think about this is these are sort of the stretches of territory, and you can assign a tarot card to each. And the tarot cards give the symbolic picture, the sort of the story that is being told, that we're walking in that 10-degree segment. And then the Sabian symbols give us an understanding of our particular relationship with that 10-degree segment, with that story. So we go through different relationships with that story as we go through the decan, or as the planet goes through the decan, it goes through different relationships with that story. So if we go down here, so a child with a huge grocery bag, that speaks to this idea of if we're overburdened before we're ready, we don't get to actually learn the essence of who we are. And then we might fulfill roles, but either we do so without having had the support, or we're fulfilling roles that aren't actually right for us. And so then that's part of what can lead to these power dynamics, right? And this bad will and the shutdown, the breakdown of communication and all of that kind of stuff. So that is an interesting way to read this, and I find it helpful and useful, particularly in trying to understand these times and how can we navigate them, how can we move through them. I feel like these times are really asking for humanity to heal itself, like that's the way through. And so how can we understand the energies of these times in a way that allows us to do that healing, each of us individually, because that's the only way society is going to heal, when we each show up and do that work. So that's looking at it within the context of the lunation cycle as a whole. And then if we, or at least part of the lunation cycle, looking at the new and the first quarter moon and then the full moon within that. And then if we look up here, we already looked at Capricorn, the moon in Capricorn at 18, and that's the overburdened child. That's my summary of that Sabian symbol. And then we also have the sun in Cancer at 18 degrees of Cancer, and that's the 3 of Cups. And that is this idea of celebration. And let's see what Waite has to say about this. So divinatory meanings: the conclusion of any matter in plenty, perfection and merriment, happy, issue, victory, fulfillment, solace, healing. Reversed: expedition, dispatch, achievement. And it signifies also the side of excess and physical enjoyment and the pleasure of the senses. So 3 has to do with Gemini, right? Gemini is the 3rd sign. So it has to do with this idea of community, and this is community celebration. So that's a cool thing. That's a good thing. We're seeing this in Cancer, nurturance and nourishment. The interesting thing is the Sabian symbol, so this is our relationship to it, is the marriage ceremony is my summary. It's something about a priest doing a marriage ceremony. So that speaks of this idea of structure and tradition, which has to do with Capricorn. The question then becomes, are we stepping into marriage because that's what's naturally opened, or are we stepping into a marriage because that's an external rite of passage that we've been conditioned to think, conditioning would be Capricorn, we have to fulfill whether or not it's in alignment with ourselves. And is the celebration a celebration in support of what truly is unfolding for someone, or is it a celebration of somebody meeting the external criteria that we've said is a good thing? And so it's not that any of this is wrong or a problem. It's about our relationship with it. Where are we in relationship to it? And that goes back to the sun in Mercury, early environment, childhood, and in Cancer. So the nurturing and nourishing of the child to understand who they are, to get to know this mystic rectangle, our essence, their essence within themselves, who they are. And so to the extent that's happening, then this can be a beautiful celebration. To the extent that we don't know ourselves, we might be stepping into a marriage ceremony and sort of keeping ourselves afloat by meeting that standard. We can be thinking, I'm someone, I'm meeting this standard, I'm succeeding, but in reality, you're failing and don't realize it. Capricorn has to do with this idea of climbing the mountain. And the way that I think about that is, first of all, whose mountain am I climbing? And if you're climbing somebody else's mountain, if you're climbing the mountain of expectation that others have put on you, then you get to the top and you feel isolated and alone. But if you're climbing your mountain of mastery of yourself, of inner mastery, then you get to the top and you feel fulfilled. So the marriage ceremony may feel really good when it's happening, and if it's in alignment with our path and who we are, and we're really anchored and understand, it can truly be that. It could also be a compensation. That good feeling could actually be a compensation. We're relying on external measures to determine if we're succeeding or not, and we may not actually be succeeding and not realize that. So all of this has to do with this idea of the inner essence, and where are we in relationship with that? And to the extent that humanity, individual humans, as a general rule, seem not to be able to be accessing that, and instead are stepping in and fulfilling roles that society says we should be fulfilled, then that suggests that we can, or where we can look according to this chart to understand that, and to perhaps to unlock that, is this T-square pointing to Ceres, in that mythology of Ceres. That one part of it, to me, seems to be talking about power struggle and sort of the neglect of the child, rather than engagement with the child. And then you have to ask the question, it's not about blaming. The question then becomes, how did that power struggle come into being? And that's just because we've created this structure that didn't allow those adults in that power struggle to come to know themselves. And so we see in the Ceres myth, from this perspective, and I haven't heard anybody else talk about it from this perspective, and I'm not an expert in mythology, so take this for what it is, me just sharing an idea that I have about it. So the question is, the solution isn't blaming people. The solution is recognizing the structures at play. And so the adults in the power struggles are the adults who were children, who were raised in a structure that didn't support and facilitate them in getting to know themselves. And this isn't about blaming parents either. This is about recognizing we're all in this structure that isn't working for any of us. And the people that it's quote unquote seems to be working for, I would argue it's not really working for them either. And so the question is, how do we shift? So one of the first things we can do to shift out of something is recognizing it. If we can recognize the dynamics, that at least gives us insight. We can start doing some healing, and from that healing, perhaps a new structure will make itself understood. And I would argue any new structure that we bring into being has to be oriented to what are the structures that support the child in growing to understand itself. And if we think about all of us through all parts of our lives needing support and structure and structures of nurture and support, if we create those structures that support and facilitate the child where they are based on what they need, we can carry that structure through to every person at every stage of life. We can creating structures that actually are adaptable to what is needed for a given person where they are in their stage of development, including structures that allow for healing to happen when for some reason we weren't able to do the work of a developmental stage, and we need to go back and create that foundation, build that foundation. So I hope that makes sense. I hope there was something helpful and worthwhile for you in this. If not, that's okay. It just means it wasn't for you and it wasn't helpful. And the most important thing is that that you tune into sources that are helpful for you, that give you insights that allow you to better understand yourself in positive and affirming ways. So that's what I ask. To the extent that this has been able to help in that way for you, that's wonderful. Otherwise, take what works and leave the rest. And I'll leave it there. Thank you, everybody who is listening. Thank you for tuning in, or who will be listening. Thank you for tuning in. Thank you for your support in that way. For those of you who have subscribed, thank you so much for that. Please feel free to subscribe if you haven't. For those of you who have subscribed at a paid level, thank you so much for that. It means a lot to me to know that people find my work, my approach to astrology and the insights it gives worth supporting in that way. And so I thank you so very much for that. With all of that said, thank you so much, and I'll leave it there. Take good care.